And I'm coming to you from Maple Fork Lodge in Beckley, West Virginia, actually Mount Hope. And very happy to see you all today. Do me a favor and post where you're watching from in the chat. That tells the algorithm more people need to be shown this live content. And so it helps out. And I just love seeing all the different places people come in from. Fernley, Nevada. I remember Fernley. I grew up in Carson City. So I've been to Fernley many times. And Chicago suburbs, I'm sorry about that for you. Iceland, sweet. I really enjoyed my trip to Iceland. So thank you from coming in. Rubina's watching from Armenia. That's amazing. And they had a lot in the news going on in Armenia over the last couple of days. But today we're going to talk about something closer to home. And that is the incredible war that's being waged against America, even still, by narco traffickers and foreign actors who are combining forces to try to kill you and me and everybody, as a matter of fact. And I mean, it's mind-boggling how much drugs is being sent into the United States. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. Before we do that, though, something else you got to worry about, and that's flu season. So take a listen to this.
Hey everybody, it's flu season, that magical time of year when pharmaceutical companies put their marketing into overdrive. You've seen the ads, you've heard the lectures, just get the shot, because nothing says confidence like the CDC describing it as moderately effective. That's like your mechanic saying, this might fix your brakes. That's not very comforting. Meanwhile, people are just done blindly lining up for whatever is trending this winter. So here's a radical idea. Take responsibility for your own health. Get a contagion emergency kit from the wellness company. I've got one. If you wake up feeling like you swallowed sandpaper and your sinuses are staging a rebellion on you, you don't have to sit in an urgent care waiting room waiting to catch something even worse from the other people that are there. Instead, you open up your kit. It includes physician-prescribed meds like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, generic Tamiflu, a generic Z-Pak, and more. Plus, it's got a doctor-written guide, so you're not guessing or doom scrolling at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's basically having a calm, competent doctor in your cabinet instead of trusting whatever chaos is happening at the ER that day. I keep one because I don't enjoy outsourcing my family's health to bureaucrats and insurance companies who are more concerned about that $15 copay than about actually getting you the care that you need. Thousands of people already have theirs ready to go. If you'd rather be prepared than panicked, go to twc.health/hotzone and use code HOTZONE to save $32. That's twc.health/hotzone, code HOTZONE. Cold and flu season is coming. You can either wait in line or you can be ready.
Okay, thank you to TWC for sponsoring today's podcast. And folks, Nathan is busy today. So Rissa, I don't know. Man, I sure appreciate you. You just don't know. Tired Mama Rissa over there, if it's possible, I don't know if you have the ability to star a question. And so, but if you do, and you see questions go by, please star them, and then they show up on a different list where I can just see the questions and I don't have to scroll through everything. So I see questions coming up already, and I'm starring them. But if I miss them, it'd be helpful if somebody else could do it. If you can't, that's fine too. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. On February 9th and 10th, there was a joint operation between the United States and Colombia that interdicted a semi-submersible drug boat, narco-sub, in the Pacific. Now, this is just off the coast of Colombia, I imagine. But here's a picture of the boat. And you can see there, I mean, that is a sizable boat. They actually took 10 tons of cocaine off of this boat. And this boat was coming out of Colombia. They build those semi-submersibles, and they're disposable. There's so much money that they can haul in cocaine that when they get it to the United States, they offload it to smaller boats that then take it ashore, and then they just sink the semi-submersible. And there is there's a huge graveyard of these things in the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it. It's just crazy that they have a whole industry that builds these semi-submersibles, and then they're just used. They're disposable. It costs a couple $1 million probably to build one of these things, but that one got taken off the market just a couple days ago, day before yesterday, and so that's good. I mean, we like that. The Colombian forces were supported by the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service or something like that. They arrested 4 people on board. They destroyed the drugs. They took, like I said, 10 tons, 22,000 pounds of cocaine off that one semi-submersible. That's, they say, about $441 million of street value of cocaine in one bust. $440 million worth. Now, what's most exciting about this operation is that it was a joint operation between the United States and Colombia. If you recall, back at the beginning of this year, President Trump and Colombia were not getting along very well. I went to Bogota, I went to Cucuta, and I heard a lot of people saying, Yankee, go home. And they were very upset because President Trump had said some unkind things about President Gustavo Petro of Colombia. Well, they kissed and made up. President Trump had a phone call with President Petro. They spoke for a while on the phone, and President Trump invited him to the White House. So February 3rd, last week, President Petro came to the White House. They sat and had a meeting, talked about these drug issues, talked about the immigration issues, and left as friends, apparently. So it's nice that they could make up. It's unfortunate that it had to get sideways to begin with. But as you know, that's President Trump's modus operandi, is to make everybody angry and then, go smooth things out later. And it was effective in this case, because it got Colombia working more with the United States on seizing these drugs. But, I just want to point out the horrifying scale of this threat. I mean, this is just one snapshot of the counter-drug war that the United States is engaged in, with Operation Southern Spear that they announced, trying to take these lethal strikes against drug boats. They've killed, 130-something people now. Now, I don't know why they didn't bomb this particular narco-sub, but instead they went and just grabbed it. Could be because, we still have a bunch of naval ships in the region, but we also have almost all of our Coast Guard cutters down there. And when the Coast Guard finds somebody smuggling drugs, they typically don't drop a warhead on them. They're not really set up to do that. So they just go catch them, pull them over, and arrest them and seize the drugs. And that's what they did in this case. So I'm imagining that in this particular case, the operation went down in such a way that it was the Coast Guard that was involved and not the Navy. If the Navy had been involved, they probably would have just left a smoking hole in the ocean and moved on. But when you look at the scale of the drugs that are being picked up, that are actually being interdicted coming into the United States, that is enough to make your head explode. But then when you realize that's a small percentage of the drugs that are coming to the United States, and it's such a small percentage that the narco traffickers just accepted it. We're going to get a certain percentage of our shipments picked up, and that's just a cost of doing business. And they make so much money on the drugs that don't get picked up that the ones that do get picked up really don't hurt them that much. And we're going to talk more about how that works. Now, President Trump's stance on the drug war, I think, is the correct one, even if it's kind of a fool's errand in a way. You're not going to kill your way out of this problem. You're not even going to arrest your way out of this problem. You might be able to sanction your way out of this problem. And so far, President Trump has resorted more to, he's done some sanctions and he's talked about more, but the real onus of the operation is in the kinetic realm, where they're trying to grab these guys or blow them out of the water. In so doing, they have really made all of Latin America kind of sit up and take notice, like, whoa, this guy's serious. And so, of course, Venezuela is now working with us more on not just the drug issue, but the oil issue. And that we're making progress there. So that's good. Ecuador has been in discussions with the United States to get more support in their fight against gangs and drug cartels and things like that in Ecuador, which it's really bad in Ecuador. There's a lot of violence down there right now. The U.S. tactics have shifted to more lethal kinetic strikes, and we talked about that. And that has opened up the United States for more criticism about the civilian deaths that are taking place. But I don't think you should think of these guys that are getting blown up in these boats as civilians. They're not civilians. They are soldiers in a war against America. They might not see it that way. They might think they're just trying to make a buck. But it doesn't matter. There is a war being waged against America in this realm, trying to pump poison across our borders and kill our people. And it's been wildly successful in terms of the numbers of people killed. I mean, we were all excited last year when only 77,000 people died of overdoses in the United States, because it was over 100,000 a year during the Biden administration, and then it started coming down. But what we'll see in a minute is that the decline in deaths is not necessarily directly tied to the increasing enforcement outside of our borders. So it's great that President Trump is sending, putting those guys to work, both the Navy and the Coast Guard, to take out these jokers. That's great, but it's not having that much of an effect in the United States. You would expect that if the supply went down and the demand was constant, that the prices of street drugs would be going through the roof. But that's not the case. Now, just to blow your mind on this, in the last year, since President Trump took office, the United States has seized almost $20 billion in street value of drugs, $20 billion with a B. And we're talking about hundreds of metric tons of drugs of different kinds. And of course, some are more deadly than others, right? Cocaine is not as deadly as fentanyl. But you know what? Fentanyl, if you just look at the fentanyl that they seized last year coming into the United States, there were enough doses, with their 2 milliliters of fentanyl is a lethal dose. And so there were enough lethal doses in what they seized in fentanyl last year to kill, you're not going to believe this number, 3.5 trillion people. That means there was enough fentanyl captured by the U.S. CBP and Drug Enforcement Administration and all those guys, HSI and everything. There was enough captured by them to kill every American 10,000 times over. And that's just what they captured. Now, according to various studies, it's of course not possible to figure out the total amount of drugs that are being shipped into the United States, because nobody's able to measure that. But you can infer the total amount from various sources, and by polling users, for example, or that sort of thing. And they estimate that the United States is only interdicting about 5 to 15% of the total amount of drugs that is coming into the U.S. 5 to 15%. Let that sink in for a minute. What that means is that if the Coast Guard grabbed $20 billion worth of drugs last year, well, that means that there's somewhere around $200 billion of drugs coming into the United States every year. And we're picking up 5 to 15%. So split the difference and call it 10%. That is mind-boggling. And, this is not just little coca growers out in the mountains of Colombia that are trying to make a living. There is some of that, but this is what I want to get at here. The cocaine, the marijuana, the meth, stuff like that that's coming into the United States is bad. There's far too much of it, but it's nothing compared to the fentanyl. And the fentanyl has declined. Actually, the amount of fentanyl being seized has gone down because the amount of fentanyl coming into the United States has gone down over the last year by about, I think, 17% was the number I saw. But the fentanyl, the reason that it is declining is not because we're picking up so much of it as it comes across the border. The amount that we have seized coming across the border is actually less than it was the last year of the Biden administration. But the total amount of fentanyl coming into the United States is likely down as well. And that's because of President Trump's threat of sanctions against China for sending these precursor chemicals. So there are Chinese companies that ship chemicals to Mexico that can be used for various things. They call them dual use chemicals. They can be used for legal purposes or they can be used to make fentanyl. And a lot of it is being used to make fentanyl. So President Trump, at the beginning of his term, put some serious pressure on Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, to do more to stop the flow of drugs into our country. But he didn't stop there. He went on to go after China and say to China, if you don't stop sending these precursor chemicals to Mexico, then we're going to sanction you. Now, I want you to understand one thing. There was a speech, a written speech that was leaked several years ago from the Chinese Communist Party. It was given by a general in a closed-door session, a PLA general, to the party members. And in that speech, he laid out China's strategy for defeating America. And part and parcel of that strategy was to rot America from the inside out by pumping the country full of illegal drugs. And so it is stated policy by China to overcome American hegemony by killing as many of our people as we can. If China went to war with us and killed 100,000 Americans in a year, we would probably be at nuclear conflict with them by that point. You imagine just looking at the last war, 20 years in Afghanistan, we lost a little less than 5,000 men and another 6,000 or so in Iraq, I think. So 10,000 guys in 20 years, which is, every one of them is a tragedy. But 100,000 a year dying of overdoses in the United States. Now, part of the reason that the overdose deaths have gone down by about 30% is because the United States has started just flooding the market with Narcan, which is a injectable antidote to a fentanyl overdose. So if somebody's tweaking out and they, do the kicking chicken on the floor next to you, then if you've got one of these Narcan injectors, you can go and save their life. And they've made it much easier to get those things. They've spread them out in all kinds of homeless shelters and food kitchens and places where junkies typically hang out. And hospitals, of course, have got these now. And they've been trained on what to do. So if you see a guy coming in, he's going into cardiac arrest because of a drug overdose, you hit him with one of these Narcan injectables and save his life. What I'm getting at is that it's not so much that because President Trump is cracking down on drugs coming into the United States, the number of overdose deaths is going down. The overdose deaths are going down because of better medical care in the United States, but the number of overdoses has not gone down all that much. Okay, so my point is that China says that they have taken steps to reduce the amount of precursor chemicals coming into Mexico, but there are still far too many precursor chemicals coming into Mexico. And the largest amount of fentanyl that comes to the United States does not come by sea, it comes by land from Mexico. It's made in Mexico with precursor chemicals that are brought from China. And those that is where we really need to be targeting our enforcement right now. And we're doing the best we can. We've actually got US troops along the border. We have shut the border to all the migrants coming in. They were a huge highway to bring drugs in. And we're ramping up enforcement efforts because we don't have so many Border Patrol agents that are acting as the welcome wagon to welcome people illegally into the United States and process their asylum applications and things like that. We can spare more agents to fight the drug war. Many of those agents are not being sent there to do that, though. They're being shunted off to grab illegal immigrants in the United States and deputized under ICE. Okay, so the scale of this threat is just mind-boggling, and the tensions that we've had with Latin American countries seem to be working in our favor. So you have to give President Trump credit. I don't like the way he does that. It's not classy. It's not diplomatic. It's not tactful. But he's getting results in that we have Latin American countries lining up to work with us to try to shut this down, with the notable exception of Mexico. Now, Mexico is playing both sides of the fence. I really believe if you talk to people in Mexico, you'll hear that the president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, is heavily connected to the cartels. So while she has to put on a good face of saying, yes, we're going after these cartels, we're shutting them down, on the other hand, maybe not so much. And really, if we want to stop the deadly chemicals that are coming into the United States, we need to be redeploying troops to the southern border. We need to be ramping up inspections. We need to train thousands more drug dogs. And we've got to secure that southern border completely. Now, there's a way to do that. I interviewed a guy a couple years ago who had a company that laid fiber optic cable. And he proposed to the Biden administration, I believe, to lay a fat pipe, a real substantial fiber optic cable all along the U.S. southern border. And it could be used to transport data from East Coast to West Coast and things like that. But on the side, that thing could be connected to a bunch of surveillance towers with high resolution cameras. And they could actually plug that into an artificial intelligence these days. And it would be able to literally watch every inch of the southern border every minute of every day and tell the difference between a jackrabbit and a deer and a man carrying a backpack full of drugs. And then could prioritize incursions where we see, hey, there's a bunch of narco traffickers trying to cut the fence down out in this, remote area of the desert. And we could send a helicopter out there to put a stop to it. Or we could send a bunch of, we could make better use of our Border Patrol agents. And he actually offered to build the first 5 miles of that for free as a proof of concept. And the Biden administration said, no, thanks, not interested. Because they really weren't interested in knowing how many people were coming across the border. You understand, if they put up those cameras along the border, they would know exactly how many people were crossing the border legally and illegally. I mean, with almost 100% precision. And the Biden administration just simply didn't want to know. Well, they didn't want you to know. And so they said, no, we're not going to do that. I think the Trump administration ought to look at turning that project back on and putting in those things, because again, with the advancements in artificial intelligence, it could dramatically act as a force multiplier for our agents on the ground. Look, people say, well, that fence doesn't do any good. You can't build a fence tall enough that they can't get over. But the fence is not necessarily designed to keep people out 100%. You're right. If we build a 40-foot fence, somebody just builds a 41-foot ladder and comes over the fence anyway. But it does slow people down, and it acts more like a speed bump than a barrier. So that speed bump just gives the Border Patrol more time to react and stop the drugs and the immigration that's coming across the southern border. If President Trump were to build that system along the southern border, the next administration is going to have a real hard time politically tearing it down. They might try to call it racist or something like that, but if they invest in that during the Trump administration and get that, at least a good start to it, it would dramatically increase our ability to stop these drugs from coming across the southern border. Now, like I said, about $15 to $20 billion a year is being seized and destroyed by the Trump administration in his second part of his first term. I'm sorry, first part of his second term. That's 500 to 600 metric tons of drugs. The Coast Guard focuses mostly on, interdicting stuff at sea. Most of that is going to be cocaine. Total seizures by weight in 2025 of cocaine are down about 16%. So you might say either they're missing more, and so more is actually making it successfully into the United States, or there's less being sent. And I would tend to go with that answer because the Trump administration has been blowing them out of the water, and that functions as a deterrent, at least to some extent. There's been a sharp decline in seizures of fentanyl, but even still, they still seized 10 metric tons of powder and 47 million pills over the last year. Again, that's enough to kill 3.5 trillion people, more than the entire population of planet Earth many times over. And that's only the 5 to 15% that's being caught. So the actual amount of fentanyl coming into the United States has got to be mind-boggling. It's amazing that our streets are not just awash in this stuff. And it concerns me because these chemicals are going to go somewhere. And if, let's say you flush a bunch of them down the toilet, they're going to get into the water supply eventually. And it could cause all kinds of problems later on. Methamphetamine is down. At least the amount of methamphetamine that's being captured is down. Now, if you go look at the CBP X page, we'll share this with you. Take a look at this. This is the CBP's page on X. And if you scroll down here, they just interdicted, let's see here.
He's going.
Look at this. They're chasing this guy down. I'm going to turn that down a little bit. Let's see if I can. So they're chasing this guy in a panga down, and he's full of drugs. And you can see, I've been out on these boats. These boats are very fast, but you can see this is dangerous. This is dangerous here. So they're shooting paintballs at him. I love it. I love it.
Move forward! Get off the steering wheel!
This is great. I don't know. I'm curious. How many of you have ever been shot with a paintball gun? So they're arresting these guys, and here we go. It's all full of. Let's see what they seized here. They used non-lethal force on the vessel operator. That's a paintball gun. 12 illegal aliens and 3 minors were on board. Wow. So this was not a drug interdiction per se, but it looked like they had drugs on there. But they also had, here's the smugglers. This came across from the Otay Mesa port of entry. They'd stopped 1,000 pounds of liquid meth concealed in a truck's fuel tank. Wow. Holy smokes. So CBP, I mean, if you go look at their page, they are making interdictions like this every single day. And what I'm getting at here is that they're only just scratching the surface. It's crazy. So I'm looking to see if you've been shot by a paintball gun. Looks like some people have, and it does. You'll feel it. They're not as bad as munitions, but paintball can be pretty painful if you get hit in the wrong place. And so those guys were actually forced to use paintballs against the guys on that boat. That was interesting. Now, these cartels are not just operating out of Mexico. Believe it or not, they're actually operating in the United States as well. There's another article that I want to show you here it says the U.S. seizes 134 acres in Texas used by a Mexican cartel. So somehow these guys got a hold of a farm or a ranch down near the border, and they were using it to stage drugs and move drugs back and forth, or into the United States. So that's pretty insane. 134 acres in the United States owned by the cartels. Believe me, folks, that's not even a fraction of the amount of land that the narco traffickers control in the U.S. Some of it they have purchased and they own it. Some of it, they find tunnels, for example, that come across the Rio Grande underneath the border, and they come up on somebody's land, and the cartel ends up owning the land where the tunnel comes out. These things are all over the place. And again, they are just scratching the surface. So this is very concerning. Of course, we're concerned about China owning land for nefarious purposes in the United States. We're concerned about these cartels. And I wonder if there's a nexus there. So the Chinese own hundreds of thousands of acres at least in the United States. Many of them are in the south near the southern border. And I wonder if there's any nexus between these Chinese-owned parcels of land and the narco traffickers. One thing we do know, because I've done reporting on this myself, is that the Chinese have gone to places where growing marijuana is legal, like Washington State, Oregon, California, places like that, and purchased farms, started illegal marijuana grows on those farms, and shipped in the labor that they need to run these farms from China. So you've got illegal Chinese immigrants working on illegal marijuana farms, growing marijuana in the United States, selling it into the same system that the legal growers sell into, but they can undercut the prices because they don't pay taxes. And they don't, they don't do the same environmental protection controls in their farming. So they're dumping chemicals into the streams and killing fish and stuff like that. And that's happening in multiple states around the country. I personally went and rode along with some sheriff's deputies up in Oregon who took us to some of the places that they had busted and showed us those things. I saw that there was another bust of a illegal Chinese marijuana grow that took place in Oklahoma a couple of years ago. It's likely that these things are all over the U.S. When even going back 30, 35 years or so, when I was flying helicopters in the National Guard while I was in college, I took a summer and got a summer job flying helicopters for the DEA. So the narco cops would come up, get in our helicopter every morning. This is in Madison, Wisconsin. We'd take off and we'd fly all over the state of Wisconsin looking for marijuana. What we found is that these marijuana growers would go out in a big cornfield, because, of course, massive cornfields up there in Wisconsin. They'd go out in the cornfield and they'd pull up stalks of corn in the middle and plant marijuana out there. So from the road, it looks like corn. But from the air, it's obvious. You can see the marijuana being grown. And so then we would hover down over the marijuana and either drop off the narco cops to go cut it down, or in place game cameras so that they could catch the guys that were coming to, cultivate those crops and end up arresting them. So pretty serious stuff. And that's been going on for a long time. The bottom line is there are nefarious actors that are associated with criminal organizations, transnational criminal organizations, or countries, adversarial countries, that are working together to continue to pump these drugs into the United States at a scale that is off the charts, mind-boggling scale, $200 billion a year or more. Insane. The number of addicts has stayed pretty constant. So like I said, my thought was, if we're interdicting these drugs and doing a better job at that the number or the price of the drugs would go up, and then that would function as a deterrent for people to get into taking drugs in the first place. We have not seen that to be the case. The number of addicts in the United States has remained about constant. And that's very concerning, because that means that despite all of the successes that the Coast Guard and the Navy and the Trump administration has had in their first year going after these drugs, we're not even scratching the surface. Okay, that's the message for today. Okay, we got a whole bunch of questions and comments, so we're going to go over to the first one here. Is it even a fair fight if the U.S. Army took on the cartels? Wouldn't they basically easily win? Well, yeah, but that would require invading Mexico, and Mexico obviously would have something to say about that. There would be some political fallout in us invading Mexico, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. I think that the Trump administration's plan to start whacking these narco traffickers in Mexico without Mexico's permission is just fine with me. I have no problem seeing that because Mexico's not going to start shelling San Diego. They're going to, fire off some strongly worded cables at the United States and condemn the U.S. actions against their, citizens, kind of like Gustavo Petro did. And that's going to be that. And we go, yeah, okay, good. 3 bags full. We're just going to keep doing it. So I don't see a problem with that. Next question. You mentioned in previous posts. Oh, Nathan's on now. Okay. You mentioned in previous posts that you think we're in World War III. In your opinion, what event or events started it? Thank you for your time and info. Well, it's been something that's gradually ramped up, and this definitely is part of it. Okay. The intentional murdering of American citizens by pumping poison across our borders by nefarious adversarial countries definitely is part of what I would consider to be World War III that we're in now. It's just World War III is not going to look like World War II, and it's being done by other means, this asymmetric warfare. And the reason is they're using asymmetric warfare is because it's much less costly, it's very effective, and you don't have to lose any of your own troops, or you don't have bombs flying at your own country. So China would much rather give us the rope to hang ourselves with, that's essentially what they're doing, than go to war with us. But I think we need to start fighting back, not by pumping drugs into China, but by taking much stronger action against China and Russia and Iran and other countries to keep them from engaging in this kind of asymmetric war. We need to call it what it is. We need to say this event qualifies as an act of war, and we're going to treat it as such. And so don't be surprised if warheads start dropping on people in your country. There you go. Next question. Could this cooperation with the U.S. be why Gustavo Petro went AWOL for a few days and said he's facing death threats? He said yesterday that he survived an assassination attempt. I haven't looked into that a whole lot, so I don't know any more details than that. But yeah, that's kind of bad. Scott says, did the Dems say it's a fishing sub? Well, it is. Yes, some Democrats were saying, oh, they're blowing up fishing boats. And we show them a picture. It's a semi-submersible. Like they don't fish from semi-submersibles. And I didn't see any reply to that. So yes. Question, why is the USS Abraham Lincoln the only aircraft carrier in striking distance to Iran? Why not have 2 or 3 carrier strike groups in the region? We're moving 2 more over there, from what I understand, and they should be there any day. So that'll make 3, and that would be enough for what we would need to do there. But we've still got quite a bit of naval power in the Caribbean with this Operation Southern Spear, and that's okay. YouTube ads shut off Chuck's voice while the ad plays, and you can't skip it. Is there a way to stop this? Yes, there is a way to stop that. It's called subscribing to YouTube. I think it's $18 or $20 a month. But I mean, look, you used to spend $200 a month on your cable bill. Most people don't do that anymore. $20 a month to not have ads on YouTube makes a tremendous amount of sense for anybody who values their time. If you value your time, if your time is worth anything, spending the price of a pizza to keep from having, 20 minutes, maybe a month of your time wasted by watching ads is totally worth it. So if you subscribe to YouTube, you don't get the ads. Now, I would recommend while you're at it, you go ahead and subscribe to this channel on YouTube, which won't turn off the ads, but it certainly won't hurt you either. And you do get access to additional content that we put up specifically, exclusively for our members on YouTube. So there's that. Now, why is the El Paso airspace closed for 10 days? It's not really on this topic, although El Paso is down near the border, so I guess you could say it is. My understanding is that the nearby airbase was going to be conducting some GPS jamming exercises, practicing their GPS jamming skills. And so they didn't want planes crashing into each other or landing at the local Walmart instead of on the airfield because their GPS was wrong. And so they just arbitrarily called the airport and said, hey, you have to shut down for the next 10 days. And there was such an outcry about that now they have reversed that decision and they're not going to make them shut down the airport for 10 days. That's a little excessive if you ask me. Like, oh, by the way, you can't do business for the next 10 days. Sorry. That's crazy. Question. The USS George H.W. Bush is on its way, and so are C-17 Globemasters. Is the U.S. waiting to make a decision in Iran until all assets are in place in a couple of weeks? Also have the Iranian leaders left? I don't believe many of the Iranian leaders have left, although some of their families have left. And the U.S. is, I think, my guess was that they were waiting for Vice President Vance and his wife to get out of the region so that they were not in the range of Iranian missiles when we strike. There was also the meeting today between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu so that they can coordinate their kinetic strikes if that's what they decide to do. And so I would say it's likely that we will see something happen in the near future, but it's been likely to happen in the near future for weeks. And it hasn't happened. So I don't know. I would just have to wait and see. St. Evinkez says, why not better educate the public that you might die if you take illegal drugs? You would think that would be a main staple of every public school system in America. And I'm sure that they have the obligatory, don't do drugs posters on the walls and in the hallways and stuff like that. But I think that it would be instructive to, I don't know if you've seen this YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly, but there's a guy that is massive channel, huge channel. And all he does is interview pimps and prostitutes and drug dealers and drug users and just people that are, at the bottom of the barrel in terms of social standing in the United States. And I love to watch his interviews just out of sheer morbid curiosity because it opens up a segment of our society that most of us know nothing about and couldn't even imagine living like those people live. And so I think that we should make those interviews required reading for a lot of young people in America today, because if you heard those stories on a regular basis, maybe once a week, listen to one of these interviews in class, I think it would kind of help you connect the dots a little bit. What do we know about the cartel and drones flying into U.S. airspace? We know that the cartel is using drones to deliver drugs across the border. The CBP has shot down several drones in the last few weeks. These are typically octocopters or quadcopters. They're large drones that can carry maybe 100 pounds. And they're just flying them across the border and dropping them. And look, that's happening more than we know, because obviously if you have a drone, you can put that thing up on the Mexican side and you can look into America and see if there are any CBP agents around. And if there is, you just don't fly in that day. If there's not, then you can freely fly in and drop your load in the United States. I would venture to say that's happening far more than we realize. It's a very simple way for narco traffickers to safely get drugs across. And then they just have one of the cartel members that's in the United States. They text him a GPS coordinate and he puts that into his phone, drives out into the desert, goes there and picks up the bundle, and off he goes. This is another reason why it would be a great idea for us to have complete video surveillance coverage plugged into AI all along the border. We can do that on the northern border too, because there's a lot of drugs that come in from the northern border as well. Next question. Will the cartels ever be defeated as long as there's such a big demand in the drugs in the U.S.? I think the simple answer to that is no. You're not going to defeat that industry until there is no more demand for their product. Next question. Do you think the war on drugs is a winnable fight without a stronger effort against addiction? I don't. We've been fighting the war on drugs for decades now, and it's every bit as bad as it used to be. In some ways it's worse, in some ways it's better. But no, I don't think we're going to win this fight. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue fighting. You just imagine 600 tons of drugs that didn't make it into the United States last year because it was interdicted is 600 tons of drugs that would have killed thousands of Americans with drug overdoses at the bare minimum. And so we are saving lives by, putting a dent in the flow, even if it's just a small dent. How bad is tunneling from Mexico to the U.S. border? Do you think drones will play a bigger part in smuggling in the future? I think drones are definitely going to play a bigger part in the future, and especially, the stuff that we're seeing in Ukraine is not going to stay in Ukraine. These drones, are getting more sophisticated, more automated all the time, and I think it's just sort of a guaranteed outcome that's going to be capitalized on by drug cartels to get drugs into the United States. Next question. What do you know about the airspace? Okay, we already got that. So we'll move on. Do you think that states that don't border Mexico understand the threat from cartels as well as border states? No, I do not. You have to really be there on the border to see the scope of the problem. And if you're not, then it's going to be somebody else's problem. But it does affect every state in the nation. Forgive my ignorance. What makes it so potent? Is it not some kind they use in medical settings? It is. And the potency is, look, fentanyl is as potent as it is, but then they cut it with other things, baking soda or talcum powder, or, different things like that, to make it go farther. And so I'm not an expert on the chemical composition of these drugs, but what I can tell you is that this stuff is, when it's highly concentrated, you could literally, take a whiff of it and die. We've had police officers who have, stuck their fingers in somebody's pockets or in a bag or something and touched some fentanyl and overdosed just by touching the powder. So it is extremely dangerous. When I talked to a counselor here in Beckley one time a couple years ago about this, and he said, man, even the drugs that people buy, cocaine and illegal drugs, much of that is getting fentanyl cut into it to make it, more potent. And people don't realize that it's got fentanyl in it. So they take what they would normally take of that drug, and it kills them. And so we're telling addicts, like, it's not enough to say, I'm not going to touch fentanyl. Fentanyl is coming looking for you. And we need to warn our kids and our grandkids about this and educate people more about it. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast today. How much fentanyl is manufactured in the United States? I don't think very much. I think the vast majority of fentanyl comes from Mexico. At least the illegal fentanyl comes from Mexico. Now, the legal fentanyl that's used in the medical industry might be made in the United States. I would hope so, because the quality control would be much better, but not the illegal drugs. Next, could fentanyl be made into a chemical weapon if it were to be dispersed in crowded areas? So yes, absolutely it could. And that's why the Department of Homeland Security classifies fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. God forbid, I don't want to even talk about the ways that stuff could be distributed in large crowds of people. But if somebody figured out how to, put that stuff into the air or the water or whatever, they could kill orders of magnitude more than 9/11 in a very short period of time. Next question. Chuck, what's your take on the FA? Okay, that's third time, so don't, let's move on. Is heroin moved through China from Afghanistan? Well, is fentanyl a conflict of interest for the Afghans? About 90% of the illegal heroin that is sent around the globe is grown in Afghanistan. The other 10% is grown in Burma. And fentanyl, I think these things are complementary, not contradictory, meaning the more drugs they can get in the United States, the better. And even if they're competing with each other for the same pool of addicts, what you find is that somebody who would shove heroin up their nose or into their vein wouldn't have a problem doing the same with cocaine or with fentanyl either. And it really comes down to what's most cost effective for them. And I've talked to a lot of people who say, if the price of cocaine goes up, then I'm going to just have to switch to heroin. Read some books about that and stuff. It's just really sad that people get into this downward spiral that ends in them overdosing and dying. Hot Zone Podcast, does North Korea, Iran, and Russia also send dual-use chemicals for cartels, or is it mainly China? No, it's mainly China. Russia and Iran and North Korea have other ways to, asymmetrically fight against America. But I haven't heard a lot about, like, for example, the Russians sending precursor chemicals to Mexico. Could be happening, but I haven't heard a lot about it. Should the use of hard drugs ever be legalized or normalized? Absolutely not. And even soft drugs like marijuana and stuff like that. If you go to the states that have legalized it, and you're as old as I am, and you remember what those states were like before they legalized drugs, it does not make the society better. It makes the society much, much worse. And so you're just legalizing, you're making it easier. You're almost facilitating people committing suicide slowly by taking those things. And they're finding out that even marijuana, it's not that safe. It jacks up your chances of a heart attack. And so it might be safer than drinking when it comes to driving or something, but it's not safer in the long term for its users. New member, Deborah Baumberger, thank you very much for becoming a member. Appreciate you. Is an addict that doesn't want help with their addiction hopeless or a lost cause? I don't like to think anybody is a lost cause, but they have to get to the point where they want help, or it's not going to help. And the best thing you can do for somebody like that is to not facilitate their bad choices in any way, shape, or form, and to try to do whatever you can to hasten them hitting rock bottom so that they'll turn their lives around. They'll start asking for help. If that means kicking them out of your house, then kick them out of your house. If that means taking away their car, not giving them money, getting them fired from their job, doing whatever you can to make their lives as miserable as possible. I believe that's the only loving thing you can do for somebody that's caught up in that is not willing to do what they need to do to get out of it. We support a program here in Beckley called Brian's Safe House that takes addicts in, teaches them a trade, gives them a lot of the gospel, changes their heart, and they've had great success with getting people out of drugs, even people who were on their last leg. Next question. On a lighter note, did you bag that moose we see behind you? I did not. It was bagged by a guy that lives down the road up in Canada somewhere, and I purchased it from him, as did I purchased it. I didn't. None of the animals that there's a bear over here. Oh, wrong camera. Let's see here. There's a bear right over there, black bear. None of the animals. Whoop. Uh-oh. I just killed the camera. Hang on a second. Let's switch over to that camera. Let's see if we can fix that. There we go. Okay, so yeah, to answer your question, no, I didn't bag any of those animals. They are decorative accoutrements for the lodge. I don't have anything against hunting, but I personally am not a hunter. The only thing I've ever hunted is people, and I prefer to keep it that way. Next question. Nitsanis are 10 times stronger than fentanyl. Have you heard of those? The name sounds familiar, but I don't know anything about it. No one speaks of the northern border. Well, we have talked about it, and I've been up there and reported on it. It's 4,000-mile northern border, and there's one Border Patrol agent for every 30 miles of border. So essentially, it's wide open. And there's a large amount of drugs that comes across the northern border into the United States as well. Chuck, what do they do with the seized drugs? Are you impressed with El Salvador, as am I? Are they still battling the cartels? Yes, my friend Oscar Blue Ramirez was just there, went into the prisons, and I may end up going later this year to El Salvador to check that out. They're obviously very proud of it, and they've made a huge difference by taking a very hard stance against the cartels and the drug dealers. So, yeah, we could do the same thing if we wanted to. What do they do with the seized drugs? They burn them. They incinerate them. Could it be put into aerosol on a drone? Let's not talk about that. Could this level of fentanyl being brought in, not for addicts' consumption, but chemical terrorism? It certainly could. It certainly could. And likely that's a matter of when, not if. New camera production is getting good. Yeah, I'm just using a different camera today rather than the camera on my laptop. Can the U.S. actually afford this much money leaving the country? Or do you think what that much money could do to benefit the U.S.? Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about $200 billion that's being spent on these drugs, or maybe it's $180 billion after the $20 billion that we actually interdict. Obviously, that money is being spent by Americans on this product and is being shipped out of the country. It goes without saying that if you could convince those people to stop doing drugs and start doing something productive with their time, the entirety of the U.S. Society would be better off. Be much less costly from a medical standpoint. They would be doing productive work and making money and paying taxes, but instead they're likely stealing that money and using it to send overseas to narco traffickers. So yeah, that's an issue. Did you do a video on your visit to Oregon? Yes, I did, and I can put that up over at chuckholton.com and show you that a little later. There you go, chuckholton.com. Is there any way U.S. law enforcement keeps track of cartel members, like a database or whatever? Not really. I think we do have a not unsubstantial intel gathering capability on the cartels, but it's nowhere near what it should be, because we really don't invest a whole lot anymore in human intelligence, because it's very dangerous. And so we kind of rely too much on signals intelligence. And that may be changing, but that's been a problem for a long time. Remember that Mary Jane Grove that ICE busted that was using child labor? Yeah, there's a lot of them get busted for using child labor and illegal immigrant labor. And in a lot of cases, those people will get their passports confiscated. They're not allowed to leave, and they don't get paid. So they're just slaves in the United States. And if they have a problem with it, they just take them out back and dump them in a hole somewhere and get new ones. Is marijuana the base of profits for the cartels, or is it the white powder? The cartels are not making near as much money off of marijuana as they used to, in my understanding. They are still making a lot of money on it, but it is bulkier and harder to ship than fentanyl and meth and things like that. So I don't think that they're making the majority of their money on marijuana anymore. Next question. Why don't they Agent Orange their cocaine plants? That would put the cartels back years. Well, they had a program to do that, essentially, in Colombia for many years. And the U.S. sent helicopters, old Huey helicopters down there, fitted them with spraying devices, and they went and sprayed all those fields, those coca fields. They don't do that anymore. They still do interdiction efforts down there, though, with the Colombian military, and go in and dig up the cocaine plants and stuff. But Colombia, if you've never been to Colombia, it's an extremely crazy, the topography is insane. Mountains, very tall mountains, the sides of it, it's very steep, jungle in areas. And so it's very, very difficult to find all of the coca plants that are being grown there. Okay, but no, they're not spraying them anymore. Do you think Israel will attack Iran without us? Well, they're saying that they will if they have to. Why are we going after the cartel if we're the one who's buying it and selling it, and you have a choice to not take it? Well, because every pound of fentanyl you take off the streets, you're saving dozens, if not hundreds of lives. And so it is a noble pursuit, but it kind of, when you look at the fact that we're only taking 5 to 15% of it off the streets, it is kind of frustrating for sure. Have Americans had enough of freedom? Don't think so. Is there a chance that the drug cartels are contributing funds to the Democratic Party here in the U.S., border crossing crime? Would not surprise me in the least. Democratic politicians getting money from cartels is totally doable. And it would be hard to track, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if that was the case. Are there Border Patrol drone swarms? No, there are not. Border Patrol is pretty behind in the drone game. More likely to see drone swarms from the cartels than you are from the Border Patrol. Border Patrol still relies more on like Reaper drones that they use for surveillance along the border, which are much more expensive. They can only be in one place at a time. It would, if they spent the money that they're spending on Reaper drones or Predators, or whatever they have down there, and they spent that on smaller localized drone swarms, or like I said, this fiber optic camera network that we could put along the southern border, I think that's the direction everything's going. Let's put it that way. How would anybody have any clue how much to take of something bought on the street? I don't know. I've never bought anything on the street. Couldn't tell you. How much do you want to bet the Taliban have ramped up the production of heroin, exporting, manufacturing since the U.S. left? Well, maybe, but the Taliban, when they were in charge before the war, actually prohibited the growing of heroin, poppies, and would kill you if they caught you growing poppies. But during the war, they changed their tune on that and they started making money off of it. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were doing it now. Marijuana being linked to psychosis. Have you heard this too? Yes, I have. Next question, not a question. It was just announced that the closure was caused by military laser tests to counter drones. Okay, well, there you go. And why don't they just do that test somewhere that's not next to the airfield in El Paso? It seems like that would be a good, sort of compromise there, right? Chuck, could you show us the bear again, please? Okay, let's see if I can do it without killing the camera again. There is the bear right there. He's a black bear from West Virginia. And my wife absolutely loves to run her fingers through his hair, that bear. And she calls the moose Sweetie Face as well. My wife always comes up with cute names for stuff. So the moose is Sweetie Face, and I forget what the bear's name is, but yeah. When the drugs are lost in the oceans, does it affect ocean life? I would imagine that in the local area around where the drugs get blown up and go down, yes, it would affect sea life that's in the area. And you'd have some, whales and dolphins going like, whoa, hey, I can catch my flippers. But I think the ocean is big enough to absorb that kind of toxins. I mean, it gets a lot more toxicity just from industrial effluent and stuff that it gets washed out to sea in a given year. So I think the total amount of drugs that's being put in the sea is not going to like pollute the whole ocean or anything. Let's hope not. And I think that stuff probably breaks down pretty quickly also. Okay, that's the last question we got. Folks, thank you for watching the Hot Zone. Appreciate all of you. Please go to chuckholton.com and become a supporter over there. That is how we continue to do this work. And so if you like it, if you want more of it, we're going to be doing our best to crank out as much as possible. You go do your part by just tossing me a few bucks over at chuckholton.com, and you get lots of extra stuff for doing that. So thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next time.